how do we talk to the right wing so that they can understand us? Do we talk slower? All right, well, that's one of the things we're gonna discuss here. Jamira Burley is joining us. She's an award-winning activist and international speaker. She's blown up on Instagram. I've seen all the videos, not a big deal, bit of a star, okay? So Jamira, welcome, it's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So Jamira, look, there's two camps kind of on how to talk to the right wing. One is just let them have it. Like just for God's sake, I mean, all of your points are ridiculous and we can easily disprove it by going to history and facts and science, etc. And it seems like that's closer to the approach that you take. And it is very often the approach I take on air, okay? But when I can contain myself, I also do the opposite. Not the opposite, but a different approach, which is to think about their perspective and talk in their language so they can maybe, understand what we're saying. So what's your take on that, Jamira? Which camp do you think makes more sense?
Yeah, so I would actually say that there are three sets of people within that camp. One, there are those with very malicious intent, right? Who know exactly what they're doing and they're designing the laws and policies in a way in which to disadvantage other communities. The second group of people, I think, are those who, have malicious intent in the sense that they are so unhappy with their own lives that they want everyone else to be just as miserable around them. And they can't fathom that minority communities are succeeding in any type of way. And so of course, it must be because of some sort of privilege that we know does not exist. And the third, I think, is a population of people that have been bamboozled, who have been so overly consumed with false information and false narrative that doesn't enable for them to make a sound decision or understand how their support of particular candidates or policies actually are harming other communities. And so for me, I target those populations. I target those who lack access to information, who want to have a better sense of what's happening around the world, who want to understand intersectionality. And my goal is to bring real facts to the conversation and also to show examples of just what's wrong with our government and how we've weaponized our government so often to not only disadvantage marginalized communities, but also to continue to keep poor communities poor.
Yeah, so I wrote down team oppression, team bitter, and team bamboozled. Yes. Okay, so those are your three camps. And so, but there's one other really, really important team, and that's team independence. And they're a different category, right? So that's why I fluctuate back and forth, because I want the independents to know, no, these guys are knuckleheads. Like slavery did exist, it was really bad. It did have consequences that flow throughout history all the way up until now, right? And on the other hand, when I'm talking to right wingers and I'm trying to convince team bamboozled, I do want to say to them, I want to use language that they can relate to better, right? So I noticed in one of your interviews, in one of your videos, for example, you were talking about defund the police, right? So look, one way to look at that is what we did earlier on Friday's show on the Young Turks, where we talked about, wait, Fox News is literally, Laura Ingraham said it, doing a program to defund the schools. And they're trying to destroy public education, defund the teachers, etc. And nobody ever focuses on that. But when we do defund the police, they just go ballistic. And it's not just right-wing media, it's mainstream media. So, but that's a long wind up to when we say defund the police, I know that every Republican shuts off their mind. And by the way, some decent number of independents too. So how do you deal with that?
It's so interesting you mentioned my video, because I do think that social media and platforms like yours are actually showing people real examples of what happens when we don't have clear checks and balances for the police, and why the institution of policing has never worked and is currently not working to keep our community safe. And so when I'm talking to people about why the importance of defund the police, and I'm actually in the middle camp of, I don't think we should there are many folks who are like, we should get away with the idea of policing altogether. But I think for many folks is a recognition of the fact that yes, we may need to have some sort of level of accountability and policing within our communities to ensure folks are safe, but the way in which police are currently operating are not keeping us safe. And when we talk about, to your point, talk about other institutions that are supposed to be in the public good, so education, housing, food, water, are keeping our streets clean. Like, we've been defunding those programs for decades. That's why our students are going into decapitated schools that don't have running water, that are falling apart. Many of them look like prisons and holding cells for students. And we know that we're around the world, we are doing so poorly in education compared to our counterparts. And so I think it's really helpful when we talk about values, when we talk about, I know you want to keep your community safe. I know you want clean drinking water for your family. I know you want access to clean healthcare, or to affordable healthcare. The folks on the opposition want those same thing too. And what we need to recognize is that the folks that you're advocating for, the legislators and the policies, are actually not working in your best interest. And they're writing legislations to strip you of the very values that you hold so true, that you're trying to ensure have access to your families. And so for me, I like to talk about values and show them that our values are not oftentimes different. They just show up different in who represents us. And we oftentimes don't recognize that who we've assigned as our leaders are actually working counterintuitive to the things that we want for our communities. And I think that helps to bring folks into the conversation when they recognize that, yes, all of us want to keep our communities safe. Yes, all of us want clean water for our families. Yes, all of us want safe spaces for our children to grow. And unfortunately, our politicians, in many cases on both the right and the left, are not doing what they're supposed to do to create that world that we deserve.
Yeah, so look, I think it's simple. I think, of course, we need policing, but the question is how? Just because we need policing doesn't mean that you need to only stop black and brown people. Like, why is that a rule, right? And you're supposed to be trying to find the criminals, not just randomly do stop and frisk on black and brown people. And like in New York, 94% of the time it was for blacks and Latinos that they did stop and frisk. So there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. All right, but speaking of right and wrong, let's go to Democrats now. So I don't know what your opinion is. My opinion is they suck, and they never ever do anything for us. I vote for Democrats so that fascists don't win in general elections, but in primaries, I try to vote against all Democratic incumbents. Not all, but almost all. So are you satisfied with the direction of the Democratic Party?
You know, I won't lie. I've worked for a number of Democratic candidates. I've advocated for many of the Democratic candidates, and I've been disappointed with many of those Democratic candidates. You know, I oftentimes think the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats is unfortunately marketing. We're not able to tell good stories that enables for us to advocate for the laws and policies that our constituencies want. Right? We oftentimes, people said that defund the police was not a good policy to run on. Well, if the vast majority of the Americans are saying something is like fundamentally wrong with how our police officers are showing up in our communities and abusing their power, I don't understand how that's not something to run on. They've allowed themselves to be sucked into this marketing scheme, which shows up in the policies that they advocate for, that oftentimes is the middle ground. And I think we're in a really interesting moment within our country's history for us to have bold ideas and bold solutions to actually be able to transform our communities for the better. You know, Joe Biden, whether or not he decides to run again, he could have been seen as the best president that we've ever had. He could have done some very bold initiatives that I think would have enabled and inspired so many young people who feel like the world is raining down on them to feel like they actually have a future in this country. And so I'm hopeful that some of that will change, but I've been disappointed in many cases so far.
Yeah, I honestly don't know anything that Democrats have done in my lifetime. So you got Biden, but Obama had a supermajority. I know it was for a small period of time, but we didn't get Roe codified. We didn't increase minimum wage. We didn't do anything about police brutality at all, not one thing. Yeah. And the only thing we passed was a healthcare bill, honestly, written by the Heritage Foundation. And it was a right-wing healthcare program that was originally called Romney Care and then Obamacare after that. So, Jamira, how in the world are we going to motivate young people who have access to the internet and can see facts to vote for Democrats if the Democrats never, ever do anything for us?
We have to get bold, and we have to not care whether or not we're reelected, right? I mean, and that's saying that in the grand scheme of things. But I think too often our politicians are thinking about their next election versus actually creating policy that people care about. That being said, I think there's two populations of young people. One, young people who understand the intersectionality and they know that we need to show up on election day regardless of whether or not we support the candidate 100%. But I also think there's a group of young people that are disillusioned with the system. And until we actually show them that their vote is going to matter, meaning that the policies, the rights that they want in their lives is actually going to be protected by our government, we're going to continue to see an uphill battle. And asking them to, and sending fundraising emails to them right after a mass shooting is not working. Sending fundraisers emails to them right after the overturning of Roe v. Wade is not enough. And so I think it requires the Democrats to actually listen to people, hear what we are saying, and write policies based on the needs and desires that their constituents are saying is at the forefront of their mind.
So Jamira, last question is an unfair one. You don't represent all Black folks. Of course.
No.
Okay, and I don't represent all Turkish American folks. Dr. Oz and I have some disagreements. So having said that, you are an activist, and African Americans have been the most reliably, not just Democratic voters, but unfortunately, establishment Democratic voters. It has killed progressives in elections. Are you seeing any movement of African American activists, which might then affect African American voters, going, oh yeah, it turns out there's a wing of the Democratic Party, the majority of the Democratic Party, that isn't ever going to do anything, and progressives actually might. So, or is that not really taking hold yet?
Yeah, I think this is such a deep question because to your point, there is such a division within the Black voting population. One, you have the older folks who very much is tied to the Democratic Party, and they've been comfortable with incremental changes. And then you have younger Black minorities who want us to do bold and innovative solutions. And I do think that that's an educational piece that we're trying to move closer to. But I do think that the deeper conversation has to be talked about how oftentimes Black people don't have the luxury of sitting a conversation out, don't have the luxury of going against what we know to be a two-party system, because we know that we're going to lose so much if, to your point in the very beginning, if a fascist elected official gets into office. And I think that scares so many people from being able to be as bold and progressive as they would like to be.
Well, you see that? Progressives have a marketing problem too, because progressives would do much better in general elections against Republicans, but we never get there because voters have heard from the MSNBC and CNN that progressives can't win elections based on absolutely nothing.
I don't believe that.
Yeah, it's no data at all. In fact, almost all the polling shows that progressives do better in general elections, but we have to deal with mainstream media lying about us 24/7. All right, Jamira Burley, everybody check her out on Instagram, Twitter, and everywhere else. Amazing, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.